The transition was not gentle. One moment, Kael stood upon the scorched plains of the ninth circle, the air thick with the screams of damned souls and the sulphurous stench of eternal torment. The next, there was a violent wrenching, a sensation of being pulled through a sieve of reality itself, and he was, elsewhere. He materialized in a standing position, his boots crunching on broken asphalt. The silence was the first shock. Not true silence, there were distant, mechanical hums, the skitter of debris in a faint wind, but it was a profound, almost deafening quiet compared to the constant, maddening din of hell. He drew in a breath. The air was stale, tinged with dust and ozone, but it was clean. No brimstone. No blood mist. Disorientation washed over him, a dizzying wave that had nothing to do with physical weakness. 1,000 years. 1,000 years of endless battle, of survival measured in heartbeats against demons whose forms defied geometry, of forging his will into an unbreakable blade within the crucible of perpetual agony. And now, peace. He had dreamed of this, in the rare moments of lucidity between slaughters. A quiet corner of a restored world. Green grass. Stillness. His eyes, pupils still holding the ghost light of hellfire, adjusted. He stood in the center of a broad, cracked city street. Buildings, once proud towers of glass and steel, lined the avenue like broken teeth. Windows were shattered or boarded over. Graffiti in a language he barely remembered, English, smeared the walls in frantic, colorful declarations. Safe Zone Delta, 7-1 red. Eclipse rules another boasted, the letters styled like slashing claws. Vehicles, rusted husks, were piled haphazardly, forming makeshift barricades. The sky above was a pale, sickly gray, not the boiling crimson or absolute black he was accustomed to. Holographic glyphs, faint and blue, flickered intermittently in the air, displaying strings of numbers and symbols that meant nothing to him. This was not the earth he left. This was a carcass, picked over and repurposed. Before the thought could fully form, a new sensation prickled at the edge of his awareness. Not the predatory hunger of a hell beast, but a sharp, focused intent. Hostility. His body reacted before his mind, centuries of ingrained reflex pulling him a half-step to the side. The movement was effortless, a whisper of motion. Asterisk crack. Crack crack crack, asterisk. Gunfire. The sharp, percussive reports echoed between the dead buildings. Tracers, streaks of glowing green energy, stitched through the air where his chest had been a microsecond before. They impacted the rusted car behind him, punching through the metal with sizzling holes. Hold fire. You'll draw every ghoul in the sector, the voice barked. From behind a barricade of overturned desks and filing cabinets, 5 figures emerged. They were clad in mismatched tactical gear, armored vests over civilian clothing, helmets with glowing visors. They moved with a practiced, wary coordination that spoke of experience in this ruined landscape. Their weapons were blocky, technological things that hummed with contained energy. They fanned out, surrounding him. Kael did not move. He simply watched them, his expression blank. The disorientation was fading, burned away by the familiar, comforting heat of imminent violence. This, at least, he understood. Scan him, the leader, a woman with a scar across her jawline, ordered. One of her squad, a lanky man with a bulky device on his arm, pointed it at Kael. A beam of red light swept over him from head to toe. The device beeped frantically. What the hell, Sarge? I'm getting nothing. No player ID. No class signature. Stats are all question marks. He's not even registering on the local threat radar. It's like he's not here. A glitch, another, younger voice asked, nervous. Or a rookie who hasn't triggered his tutorial yet, the sergeant, whose nameplate read Vance, said, her voice dripping with contempt. She looked Kael up and down. He wore simple, dark garments of no discernible make, stained with ancient, unidentifiable filth. He carried no visible weapon. Looks like fresh meat that fell out of a malfunctioning spawn point. Probably thinks this is a bad dream. She raised her voice, addressing Kael directly. Listen up, glitch. You're in Safe Zone Delta, 7. The tutorial's over. This is the real game. And you're in our farming run. She gestured with her rifle. Drop any loot you're carrying. Your credits, your low-tier mats. Do it fast, and we might let you run into the ruins before the zone shrinks. Maybe you'll last 10 minutes. Kael's head tilted slightly. Their words were noise. The meaning was clear, predators claiming territory. He had dealt with such creatures in the first circles of hell. They were always louder than they were dangerous. "He's not moving," the lanky scanner man, Rourke, muttered. "Stunned stupid," Vance sneered. "Fine. We'll do it the hard way. Light him up. Quick and clean." They opened fire. Not just the leader, but all five. A concentrated volley of green energy bolts converged on Kael's center mass. They were not aiming to disable, they were aiming to erase. The bolts never reached him. They struck an invisible barrier mere inches from his body and vanished. Not deflected. Not absorbed with a flash of light. They simply ceased to exist, winking out of reality without a sound, without a ripple. The air around Kael didn't even shimmer. The gunfire stopped abruptly. "What?" Vance breathed, her confidence cracking. Rourke was frantically tapping his scanner. No shield signature. No mana fluctuation. The system isn't logging any damage mitigation. It's not registering the attacks at all. Kael looked down at his own chest, then back at them. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips. It was not a sigh of relief, but of profound, weary disappointment. So this was the peace he had earned. More violence. Just with smaller, noisier weapons. His passive aura of annihilation, a field of nullification forged in the heart of a dying chaos god, required no conscious thought. It was as innate as breathing. To him, it was the simple, immutable fact that such trivial energies could not touch him. To the world around him, it was a law-breaking paradox. "He's a hacker." An exploit, one of the younger players, a woman named Shen, shouted, her voice rising in panic. "Use a disruptor grenade." Vance recovered, her face hardening. "Switch to physical rounds. Bypass whatever cheat he's using." With mechanical clicks, their weapons reconfigured. The next volley was a storm of high-velocity slugs, tungsten-tipped and designed to pierce armor. They met the same fate. They traveled, they reached the point of non-existence, and they were gone. Kael took his first step forward. It was not a rush. It was a slow, deliberate pace, the calm stride of a man walking across an empty room. The squad stumbled back, their training breaking under the weight of the impossible. "Fall back. Regroup at point," Vance began to order. Kael's eyes fell upon a small, gray pebble near his foot. A piece of the shattered city. An idea, cold and precise, formed in his mind. He needed information. He needed to understand the rules of this new hell. And these creatures had attacked him. That made them a source. He bent down, movements economical, and picked up the pebble. It was rough, unremarkable. He held it in his palm. Deep within him, in a place that was not quite his heart and not quite his soul, a reservoir stirred. Soul essence, the fundamental currency of power he had learned to harvest from the dying in the abyss. A tiny, almost negligible fraction of it, a droplet from an ocean, flowed down his arm and into the stone. True damage imbuement. The pebble in his hand did not glow. It did not hum with power. To any observer, it remained a simple piece of rubble. But Kael felt the change. It had become an absolute concept, a thing that would bypass any defense, ignore any armor, and inflict its kinetic truth upon the target. It was no longer a rock, it was the idea of a penetrating strike given form. He flicked his wrist. The motion was casual, underhanded, like skipping a stone across a pond. The pebble vanished from his hand. Across the street, Rourke, who was bringing his scanner up for another frantic reading, suddenly jerked. A small, neat hole appeared in the center of his armored vest. There was no impact flash, no spray of molten plating. The advanced composite material, rated to stop high-caliber rounds, simply offered no more resistance than air. The hole appeared in the scanner he held against his chest, then in the armor, then in the man beneath. He looked down, confused, then crumpled, his body slumping to the ground without a sound. His health bar, visible to his comrades as a glowing red line above his head, didn't deplete. It simply vanished, as if deleted. "Rourke!" Chen screamed. Vance spun, firing wildly. "Scatter. Don't let him line up." Kael had already picked up 2 more pebbles. Another minor drain from his soul essence reserve. Flick. Flick. 2 more players, a man named Finn who was diving for cover behind a car door, and Chen who was trying to activate a personal energy shield that sprang to life in a dome of crackling blue light, met identical fates. The pebble passed through Finn's car door cover as if it were mist, then through him. Chen's powerful energy shield, capable of withstanding a direct rocket hit, did not even flicker as the pebble passed through it and her. Both fell, their vital systems utterly bypassed, their bodies failing from a trauma that ignored every protective rule of their world. Only Vance and the last remaining squad member, a hulking man called Briggs who wielded a heavy rotary cannon, were left. Briggs roared, a sound of pure terror and rage, and unleashed a deafening torrent of fire. The stream of rounds created a continuous, blinding line of tracers aimed at Kael. They all disappeared into that same silent, invisible boundary, a waterfall vanishing into an unseen drain. Kael took another pebble. He looked at Vance, who was backing away, her rifle now hanging limply at her side, her face a mask of utter horror. "What are you?" she whispered, the game's bravado completely stripped away. He did not answer. He flicked the pebble. It pierced Briggs's rotary cannon at the chamber, causing a catastrophic misfire that should have been impossible. The weapon exploded not outward, but inward, the force somehow contained and directed solely into the man's body. Briggs was thrown back, his massive form slamming into a wall, leaving a crater of pulverized brick before he slid down, unmoving. Vance was alone. She dropped her rifle, hands raised. "Wait. Please. I have information. Credits. I can." Kael walked up to her, stopping an arm's length away. The stench of her fear was sharp and human. He reached out, not with his hand, but with his will. An extension of the Hellforge system, an instinct honed over millennia of consumption. Soul Reeve. His fingers did not touch her. From the bodies of Rourke, Finn, Chen, and Briggs, faint, wispy tendrils of silver-gray light, invisible to anyone without his perception, streamed forth. They were not the souls themselves, but their residual essence, the energy of their extinguished life force within this game's framework. The tendrils flowed into Kael, a cool, energizing trickle that pooled in his internal reservoir. He felt a slight, almost negligible surge in potential power. It was a meager harvest, but it was a start. It was proof this world's inhabitants could fuel him. Vance, seeing nothing of this, only saw his focused gaze. She sobbed, a broken sound. "Mercy." He considered her. Information could be useful. But she had fired first. She had intended to harvest him. In all the hells he had survived, he had learned one unassailable truth: mercy, unearned, was a seed that grew into your own grave. He had no questions for her that her actions had not already answered. He turned away, leaving her trembling on the street. She was beneath his further notice. As he turned, contemplating the silent, dead street and the strange, hollow victory, the world changed. The pale gray sky tore open with a soundless, violent flash of crimson. Glyphs of blazing red light, each the size of a building, scrawled themselves across the firmament in a language of harsh, angular symbols. They pulsed with urgent, alarming light. A voice boomed forth, not from any point in the city, but from the air itself, from the ground, from inside the mind. It was a cold, genderless, perfectly modulated digital voice that carried absolute authority. Error, unauthorized reality manipulation detected. The words hung in the air, etched in light and sound. Spatial anomaly confirmed. Temporal signature, incoherent. Power source, unregistered. Designating, anomaly number 001. Priority, absolute. Directive, containment and deletion. As the announcements echoed, the red holographic warnings flashed faster, casting the ruined cityscape in a hellish, strobing glow. At the far end of the avenue, near a collapsed overpass, the air shimmered like a heat haze. With precise, silent pops of displaced air, 3 figures teleported into existence. They were tall, clad in sleek, form-fitting uniforms of matte black and silver, devoid of any insignia or personalization. Their faces were obscured by smooth, featureless helmets that reflected the crimson alarm lights. They carried no obvious weapons, but the air around them crackled with restrained power, and their postures radiated lethal, efficient purpose. They did not scan the area. Their blank visors were fixed, unerringly, on Kael. One of them raised a hand. A complex, three-dimensional holographic interface, glowing with dense streams of code, sprang to life in the air before it. Its fingers moved through it, inputting commands. Kael watched them arrive. The disorientation was gone entirely now, burned away completely. The disappointment was gone too, replaced by a slow, familiar heat that began to burn in his gut. This was not peace. This was not home. This was just another layer of the game. And he had just been marked to play. The air in safe zone Delta 7 grew heavy, thick with the ozone scent of teleportation residue. Kael stood motionless amidst the scattered remains of the scavenger squad, his passive aura shimmering faintly like heat distortion over desert sands. The crimson holographic warning still flickered in the air around him, their angular glyphs declaring him anomaly number 001 in a language that felt both alien and familiar. 3 figures materialized from nothingness, their arrival silent yet seismic. They wore featureless black uniforms that drank the light, their faces obscured by smooth masks that reflected nothing. Triangular patterns glowed softly on their chests and shoulders, administrator sigils. They formed a perfect triangle around Kael, each positioned precisely 30 paces away. "Cease all anomalous activity," the central figure commanded, its voice synthesized and genderless. "You have violated Protocol 7.3, unauthorized reality manipulation. Surrender your interface for immediate quarantine." Kael said nothing. His eyes, hardened by a millennium in screaming hell's capes, measured the threat. These weren't players. Their energy signatures pulsed with system authority, woven directly into the game's framework. The air around them hummed with structured power. The administrator to his left raised a hand. Geometric patterns unfolded from its palm, interlocking hexagons that expanded into a shimmering latticework. Deploying reality suppression field alpha. Pressure descended. Not physical force, but something deeper, a weight that pressed against the very fabric of Kael's existence. His passive aura of annihilation, which had nullified gunfire and energy blasts without effort, now strained. Visible ripples spread across its invisible boundary as the suppression field attempted to force compliance with game physics. "Your anomaly rating increases with resistance," the central administrator stated. "Final warning, deactivate your unauthorized interface." Kael felt the strain. Not pain, he'd forgotten what pain felt like after the first 3 centuries, but inconvenience. The suppression field sought to overwrite his reality with the game's rules, to make him just another player bound by hit points and cooldown timers. His Hellforge system, forged in realms where reality was a suggestion rather than a law, pushed back. He glanced at his invisible interface. The soul essence counter glowed softly in his perception, 10 units harvested from the 4 scavengers. Enough. Harvest confirmed, the right side administrator reported, its mask tilting slightly. Target is accessing unauthorized energy reserves. Escalating to level 2 suppression. All 3 administrators raised their hands now. The air crackled as additional fields layered over the first, diamond-shaped patterns that rotated clockwise, counterclockwise, and in impossible non-Euclidean angles. The pressure doubled, then tripled. Kael's aura visibly warped, compressing inward until it formed a perfect sphere around him, 6 feet in diameter. The ground within that sphere remained untouched, while everything outside began to shimmer with forced compliance to game rules. "Interesting," Kael murmured, his first word since their arrival. He reached into the Hellforge system, not with hands but with will. The interface responded instantly, a familiar presence that had been his only companion through endless demonic wars. He tapped the soul essence reserve. 10 units flowed into a skill slot that had remained dark since his return. Hellfire eruption, unlocked. The administrator's sensors screamed warnings. Massive energy spike detected. Pattern matches no registered skill. Initiating emergency containment. Kael didn't give them time to finish. Black flames erupted from his body. Not fire as the game understood it, no heat signatures, no particle effects registered by the system's sensors. This was hellfire, born from realms where physics served suffering. It flowed like liquid shadow, spreading in a perfect wave that expanded at the speed of thought. The suppression field shattered. Not broken, not overloaded, they simply ceased to exist where the flames touched them. The administrator's invincibility frames, those precious milliseconds of damage immunity granted by their admin status, meant nothing. Hellfire didn't deal damage, it unmade. The central administrator raised a barrier, a wall of crystalline light that should have blocked any player attack for 30 seconds. The black flames flowed through it like smoke through a sieve. The administrator's mask cracked, revealing nothing beneath but more black uniform. It stumbled backward, systems reporting errors Kael could almost hear. Containment failure. Anomaly bypassing all defensive protocols. Reality anchors destabilizing. The left administrator attempted to teleport away. Its form flickered, began to dissolve into data streams, then the hellfire reached it. The teleportation reversed, the administrator rematerializing fully as the flames wrapped around its legs. Black tendrils climbed upward, consuming not flesh but code, not body but permissions. My access levels, they're being overridden. What is this? Kael watched dispassionately. The hellfire was an extension of his will, burning away everything that tried to constrain him. It reached the right-side administrator last, who had been attempting to log the event. Data streams flowed from its mask to somewhere beyond, to whatever server housed the game's administrators. The hellfire followed the connection. For a fraction of a second, Kael saw through the administrator's sensors. He saw a sterile white room filled with hundreds of identical black uniformed figures monitoring holographic displays. He saw alerts flashing across every screen. He saw one figure different from the others, taller, with a crimson sigil instead of triangular patterns, turned toward the connection just as the hellfire reached the server. Then the connection severed. The right-side administrator collapsed, its uniform turning gray as its admin privileges were burned away. The remaining two administrators retreated, not with panic but with cold efficiency. They didn't run, they stepped backward into shimmering portals that opened behind them. The central administrator spoke one last time as it faded. Anomaly logged. Overseer notified. Deletion protocols escalating. Then they were gone. The hellfire receded, flowing back into Kael like tide returning to sea. The black flames vanished, leaving no scorch marks, no evidence of their passage except for the three gray uniforms lying where the administrators had stood. Kael approached the nearest one. He reached down, and his hand passed through it like mist. The uniform dissolved into pixels, then into nothingness. System deleted them, he realized. Failed assets purged. He checked his Hellforge system. The soul essence counter remained at 0, he'd spent all 10 units to unlock Hellfire Eruption. But the skill now glowed steadily in his interface, permanently available. A worthwhile trade. For several minutes, Safe Zone Delta 7 was silent. The crimson warnings had vanished. The air no longer hummed with suppression fields. Kael stood alone amidst the ruins, his aura once again invisible and effortless. He closed his eyes, extending his senses beyond the physical. That's when he felt it. A presence. Vast. Cold. Watching from somewhere beyond the game's map, beyond even the servers. It wasn't looking at his body or his location, it was looking at the anomaly itself, at the hole he'd torn in the game's reality. The scan was subtle, so refined that most beings wouldn't have noticed it. But Kael had spent centuries learning to sense predators in the dark. The Overseer. He opened his eyes. Above him, the sky, or what passed for sky in this manufactured world, rippled. Holographic lines spread outward from a point directly overhead, forming a grid that covered the entire visible horizon. At the center of the grid, a crimson marker pulsed. It showed his exact location in 3 dimensions, complete with elevation and orientation data. Then text appeared beside the marker, visible for miles in every direction. Anomaly number 001. Bounty, 1 million credits. Status, active. Last known position, Safe Zone Delta 7. Kael watched as additional markers appeared across the map. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Each represented a top-ranked player or guild, and all of them were now moving. Converging. Their trajectories formed arrows pointing directly at his location, a spiderweb of hostile intent tightening around Delta 7. The most prominent marker bore a name in elegant, shadowed script, Eclipse. It was already closer than the others. Much closer. Kael smiled, a thin, humorless expression that hadn't touched his face in centuries. He flexed his hands, feeling the power of the Hellforge system humming beneath his skin. The game thought it had cornered him. The Overseer thought marking him would make him prey. They'd forgotten what he was. What a millennium in hell makes of a man. He turned toward the approaching eclipse marker, his shadow stretching long behind him as the artificial sun began its programmed descent. The hunt was on. But they had the roles reversed. He wasn't the one who should be running. The air in the urban zone tasted of ozone and decay, a metallic tang that clung to the back of Kael's throat. He moved through the skeletal remains of what had once been a bustling city district, his footsteps silent on the cracked asphalt. Above, the sky shimmered with the artificial glow of the game's interface, a sickly green grid that pulsed with the rhythm of the shrinking safe zone. Kael's senses, honed over a millennium in hellscapes where every shadow hid teeth, were stretched taut. The passive aura of annihilation hummed around him like a second skin, a barely perceptible distortion in the air that nullified the ambient radiation and psychic whispers left by the system apocalypse. He didn't need to see the crimson countdown in his peripheral vision to feel the safe zone contracting. It was a pressure building in his bones, a gravitational pull drawing all living things toward the center of the designated area. To the game's players, this was a mechanic, a brutal funnel designed to force conflict. To Kael, it was a familiar echo of Hell's own geography, where territories constantly collapsed into vortices of screaming souls. He'd survived those by moving against the flow, by finding the cracks in reality's fabric. Here, he did the same, slipping through alleyways choked with rusted vehicles and collapsed billboards. The buildings around him were monuments to a dead world. Glassless windows stared like empty eye sockets. Faded advertisements for soft drinks and virtual reality suites peeled from walls in translucent strips. But this corpse of a city was far from empty. Kael's hell-forged instincts prickled as he detected movement in the shadows, not human, but something hungrier, something engineered by the game. He paused at the intersection of two shattered streets, his gaze sweeping over the debris. The Hellforge System, that invisible interface etched into his consciousness during his thousand-year torment, provided no map, no quest markers, no stats beyond what he willed into being. But it did grant him perceptions that bypassed the game's intended limitations. He could feel the soul essence in the air, thin, scattered threads of life force left by the recently deceased, both players and monsters. It was a faint glow to his inner sight, like embers in ash. A low growl vibrated through the ground. Kael didn't turn. He already knew their positions. 6 of them, emerging from the hollowed-out storefronts and sewer grates. Cyberwolves, the game's designation for these creatures, though they bore little resemblance to any earthly canine. Their bodies were sleek composites of black alloy and synthetic muscle, eyes glowing with cold blue optics. Jagged metal spines ran along their backs, and their muzzles were lined with vibro teeth that hummed with disruptive energy. They were pack hunters, programmed to isolate and overwhelm solo players caught outside the safe zone's immediate protection. The lead wolf, larger than the others with crimson markings on its shoulders, lunged first. It moved with terrifying speed, a blur of dark metal that closed the 20-meter distance in under a second. Its jaws snapped shut on empty air where Kael's throat had been. He'd shifted barely an inch, letting the creature's momentum carry it past him. The passive aura flared briefly as the wolf's vibro teeth grazed the energy field, and the disruptive hum died into a sputter of sparks. The other 5 attacked in coordinated waves. 2 came from the left, aiming for his legs. 3 from the right, going for his torso and back. They were efficient, merciless, perfect expressions of the game's design. To any other player, even a high-level one, this would have been a death sentence. Energy shields would have buckled under the sustained assault. Armor would have been shredded. Kael didn't raise a hand. He simply stood there, letting them come. The wolves impacted his aura in a chorus of shattering metal and dying electronics. The passive aura of annihilation didn't just nullify attacks, it unraveled them at a fundamental level. The vibro teeth disintegrated before they could touch him. The synthetic muscles seized and tore. The blue optics flickered and went dark. But the creatures didn't die immediately. They were machines with biological cores, and their programming drove them to keep attacking even as their bodies failed. They staggered back, limbs twitching, metal hides cracking under the strain of the aura's constant pressure. The lead wolf with crimson markings managed a second lunge, but its movements were slow, jerky, like a puppet with cut strings. Kael watched dispassionately as it collapsed at his feet, optic lenses dark, its internal systems reduced to slag. This was the game's weakness, he realized. It operated on rules, hit points, damage calculations, resistance values. His Hellforge system operated on a simpler principle, existence or non-existence. There were no numbers to crunch, no stats to compare. Either something could withstand the annihilating weight of a millennium in hell, or it couldn't. But weakening them wasn't enough. Kael needed essence. He focused inward, reaching for the Hellforge interface. Soul Reeve, a skill he'd unlocked through the harvested essence of the scavenger squad. It required an expenditure, a bridge of power to initiate the connection. He felt 5 units of his stored soul essence flow out of him, a cold rush that left a momentary hollow in his chest. Then the skill activated. The air around the dying cyberwolves thickened. Shadows deepened, pulling toward Kael as if he'd become a singularity. From each creature, faint wisps of light began to tear free, not the blue of their optics, but a pale, sickly green that pulsed with fading life. These were the soul fragments the game had implanted in them, the energy that made them more than mere automations. Soul Reave didn't just harvest essence from the dead. It tore it from the living. The wolves shuddered as the process began. Their twitching intensified into violent convulsions. The lead wolf let out a sound that was half mechanical whine, half biological whimper. Kael watched as the green wisp stretched toward him, elongating into thin streams that poured into his chest. The Hellforge system drank them greedily, converting them into raw power. He could feel his reserves replenishing and then growing, 8 units, 12, 15. The process was efficient, brutal. It left nothing behind. When it was over, the cyberwolves lay still, their bodies now truly inert husks. No loot notifications flashed in Kael's vision. No experience points were awarded. The game system registered only that 6 monsters had been eliminated by an unknown force, another anomaly to log, another error to investigate. Kael took a slow breath. The harvested essence warmed him from within, a familiar sensation that reminded him of Hell's forges where souls were currency. He could sense the environment more clearly now. Those scattered threads of soul essence he'd noticed earlier, they glowed brighter in his perception. He could trace them to their sources, a pile of rubble where a player had died to a trap 2 hours ago, a scorched patch of ground where a monster had been incinerated, even the faint echoes clinging to the rusted vehicles. The game was a farm, he realized. Not just for Ethelgard Incorporated's mysterious purposes, but for him. Every death here produced residue, essence that lingered until the system recycled it. And with Soul Reave, he could claim it all, growing stronger outside the intended progression, becoming a cancer in the game's carefully balanced economy. He was about to move toward one of the brighter essence clusters when a new presence registered on his senses. Not a monster. Not a wandering player. Something focused, deliberate. Kael turned his head slightly, gaze tracking to the roof of a half-collapsed office building 2 blocks away. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the artificial sky. Humanoid, but clad in armor that seemed to drink the light, deep purple plates edged with silver, a cloak that billowed in a wind that didn't touch the ground. In one hand, the figure held a staff topped with a crystalline orb that pulsed with soft violet light. The figure raised its free hand. A holographic screen materialized in the air before it, visible even at this distance. Kael's enhanced vision caught the details. It was a bounty notice, his own face rendered in stark detail from the system's scans during the administrator confrontation. Below it, glowing text scrolled too fast for normal eyes to read, but Kael caught the key phrases. Anomaly number 001. Reality Breaker. Bounty, 50,000 credits and Eclipse Guild sponsorship. Last known location, Urban Zone Alpha, 9. The figure, Kael now recognized the armor as belonging to Eclipse, the top-ranked guild, touched the screen. The bounty broadcasted, rippling out through the game's communication channels. Kael felt it happen, a vibration in the very air as the information propagated. The figure then pointed the staff directly at him, and the crystalline orb flared with intense light. A beam of violet energy lanced across the distance, not aimed at Kael, but at the sky above him. It exploded into a brilliant marker, a pulsating sigil of intersecting circles and jagged runes that hovered over his position, visible for kilometers in every direction. A targeting beacon. From all around the urban zone, Kael's senses screamed in warning. Dozens of presences, then hundreds, all suddenly shifting direction. Players who had been hiding, hunting monsters, or fighting each other, all now converging on the beacon. He could feel their intent like heat on his skin, hunger for the bounty, for the prestige, for the chance to kill the anomaly that was breaking their game. The Eclipse figure on the rooftop gave a slight, mocking bow before stepping back and vanishing in a flash of teleportation energy. Kael stood alone in the intersection, the cyberwolf husks at his feet, the beacon pulsing above him like a second sun. In the distance, he could hear the first sounds of the hunters approaching, the rev of hoverbike engines, the crunch of boots on rubble, the activation of energy weapons. The safe zone continued to shrink, herding them all toward him. A faint, cold smile touched his lips. In Hell, he'd learned one truth above all others: when the world comes hunting, you don't run. You make them regret ever smelling your blood. He reached for the soul essence within him, feeling its newly augmented strength. The harvest had only just begun. The abandoned mall loomed like the ribcage of some long-dead beast, its shattered skylights casting fractured light across the debris-strewn floor. Kael stood in what had once been a central atrium, his senses stretched thin. The violet beacon still pulsed at the edge of his awareness, a constant, nagging reminder that hundreds now hunted him. But it was the closer presence that concerned him now. 5 figures materialized from the shadows with practiced silence. They wore deep purple armor etched with silver circuitry, the mark of eclipse. Their movements were synchronized, fluid, each taking position at a different level of the mall's ruined architecture. One stood on a collapsed escalator, another perched on a broken mezzanine railing, 2 more flanked the main entrances, and the last, a woman with twin energy blades crackling at her wrists, landed softly 20 paces before him. "Anomaly number 001, she said, her voice amplified by her helmet systems. "I am Vice Captain Celine of Eclipse. You've caused quite the disturbance." Kael said nothing. His Hellforge system flickered at the edge of his vision, displaying the ambient soul essence lingering in the mall, ghostly trails of energy from past battles, faint but palpable. He had 15 units stored, harvested from the cyber wolves and the earlier kills. It would have to be enough. "Your little tricks won't work here," Celine continued, gesturing with one blade. "We've studied the system logs from your encounter with the administrators. Reality manipulation, true damage, essence harvesting, all violations of game protocols. But more importantly, you're disrupting the natural order." One of the Eclipse members on the mezzanine raised a staff. Crystalline energy pulsed from its tip, weaving through the air like liquid light. "Trap field, chronostasis," he announced. The energy solidified into shimmering hexagonal barriers that materialized around Kael, boxing him in a 10-meter cube. Time within the field visibly slowed, dust particles hung motionless, light bent at strange angles. Another member, positioned near a shattered fountain, slammed his gauntlet hands together. "Trap field, gravity well." The air thickened, pressure mounting until the floor tiles beneath Kael's feet cracked and powdered. The combined effects should have crushed any normal player, reducing them to paste. Kael felt the strain against his passive aura of annihilation. For the first time since his return, the nullification field wavered, not breaking, but bending. The chronostasis slowed his movements, the gravity well made each breath laborious. He could feel the game's rules pressing against him, trying to enforce compliance. "Our stats are maxed," Celine said, pacing just outside the trap fields. "Every skill tree perfected, every piece of gear optimized through months of grinding. We've fought monsters that would make lesser players quit the game entirely. And you just appeared and started breaking everything." She activated a holographic display from her wrist. "Look at this. Your passive aura shouldn't exist. True damage imbuement is a developer-only tool. Soul essence harvesting isn't even in the codex." Her voice took on an edge of genuine curiosity. "Who are you really? Some corporate tester gone rogue? A glitch in the system?" Kael finally spoke, his voice low but carrying through the distorted air of the trap fields. "I survived 1,000 years in hell. This." He gestured vaguely at the mall, at the trap fields, at the Eclipse members. "This is a child's game." Celine's helmet tilted. "Arrogant. Let's see how you handle this." She raised a hand. The 2 Eclipse members at the entrances activated their own skills. "Trap field, energy drain," one called out. Tendrils of violet light snaked from his palms, attaching to the chronostasis barrier and beginning to siphon energy. "Trap field, corrosive mist," the other announced, releasing a cloud of acidic vapor that swirled around the gravity well, eating at the air itself. For trap fields now overlapped, time manipulation, gravitational force, energy theft, and corrosive decay. The mall groaned under the strain. Support beams twisted, glass shards vibrated and shattered further, the very structure protesting the concentrated violation of physics. Kael's Hellforge system displayed warnings. Passive aura integrity, 87%. Environmental hostility, critical. But more importantly, it showed him the flows of energy. The trap fields were intricate constructs of game code given form, but they had weaknesses, seams where different effects interfaced, moments of synchronization when the fields pulsed in unison. He closed his eyes, reaching for the soul essence within him. 15 units. He'd need all of it. "Void step," he whispered. The world fractured. 15 units of soul essence burned away in an instant, leaving his reserves empty. But in that expenditure, space itself unraveled around him. The trap fields, designed to contain physical movement, couldn't account for something that simply ceased to exist within their boundaries. Kael phased through the chronostasis barrier like smoke through a sieve. The gravity well's crushing force grasped at nothing. The energy drain tendrils flailed uselessly. The corrosive mist dissipated where he had been. He reappeared behind the Eclipse member on the mezzanine, the one who had cast chronostasis. The man barely had time to turn, his staff beginning to glow with a defensive shield. Kael's fist, already imbued with true damage, punched straight through the energy barrier, through the purple armor, through the man's chest. There was no dramatic explosion, no flashy effect. Just a clean, brutal hole where heart and lungs should have been. The Eclipse member looked down in disbelief, then dissolved into motes of light and data fragments. Soul Reeve, Kael murmured. Essence flowed into him, rich, potent, far more than he'd harvested from the cyber wolves or the scavenger squad. This was a top-ranked player, someone who had accumulated power through the game's intended systems. 5 units replenished his reserves immediately. Chaos erupted. He's out, someone shouted. Flank him. Kael moved before they could coordinate. He dropped from the mezzanine, landing lightly despite the lingering effects of the gravity well. The Eclipse member who had cast that trap was already retreating, hands raised to summon another skill. Kael closed the distance in 3 strides, his movements blurred with residual void step energy. True damage didn't care about armor rating, about damage reduction stats, about defensive cooldowns. Kael's elbow smashed into the man's helmet, and the reinforced alloy crumpled like paper. Another harvest. Another 5 units of soul essence. 10 units now. The remaining 2 Eclipse members at the entrances opened fire. Energy bolts sizzled through the air, plasma rounds that should have melted through concrete. Kael's passive aura flared, nullifying them inches from his skin. The attacks dissipated into harmless light, but he could feel the strain, each impact cost him a fraction of his aura's integrity. Celine was moving too, her energy blades leaving afterimages as she blurred forward. He's burning through our people, she barked into her comms. All Eclipse units in the sector, converge now. Priority override. Kael ignored the ranged fire, focusing on the closer threat. Celine's blades came at him in a cross-pattern strike, aimed to decapitate. He didn't block. He stepped inside the attack, letting the blades pass harmlessly through his aura, and drove his palm into her chest plate. The true damage should have killed her instantly. But Celine's armor glowed with emergency shielding, some last-ditch survival skill. It held for a fraction of a second before shattering, but that fraction was enough for her to disengage, bleeding from the nose but alive. You're stronger than the logs indicated, she gasped, backpedaling. But you're still just one man. Kael felt it then, more presences approaching. Dozens of them. Eclipse reinforcements, drawn by Celine's call. They'd be here in minutes. He made a decision. Instead of pursuing Celine, he turned to the 2 remaining Eclipse members at the entrances. They were still firing, still trying to whittle down his aura. Kael spent 5 units of soul essence to activate Void Step again, covering the distance between them in an eye blink. 2 quick strikes. 2 more harvests. His soul essence reserves climbed to 20 units. He turned back to Celine. She stood alone now, her squad dead or dying around her. The confidence had bled from her posture, replaced by something colder, professional assessment. She knew she couldn't win. You'll never make it out of this sector, she said, her voice steady despite the blood trickling from her lip. Every top guild has your coordinates. The administrators have marked you for deletion. This game, it has rules. And you're breaking all of them. Kael approached slowly. Your rules mean nothing to me. Maybe not. But they mean something to the Overseer. She activated a final skill, not an attack, but a transmission. Her armor glowed, projecting holographic data into the air between them. I'm sending everything. Combat logs, energy signatures, skill analysis. Let them see what you really are. Kael reached her. He could have killed her easily. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Tell your guild to stay away. Tell everyone to stay away. Then he harvested her essence. Celine didn't scream. She just went rigid, eyes widening behind her helmet's visor as her life force, her accumulated experience, her stats, her very presence in the game, was torn from her and absorbed into Kael's Hellforge system. 25 units of soul essence now. The richest harvest yet. As her body dissolved into data fragments, something triggered. Not just the usual player death notification, but a system-wide alert. Crimson warnings flashed across every surface in the mall, on shattered screens, reflected in broken glass, even projected into the air itself. Elite player eliminated, Vice Captain Celine of Eclipse. Anomaly number 001 confirmed as threat level, catastrophic. Oversight protocols engaged. But it was what happened next that made Kael pause. One of the mall's few functioning security cameras, a dome-shaped device hanging from a frayed wire, rotated to focus on him. Its lens glowed with unnatural light. The image it captured didn't just record, it projected. A life-sized holographic feed materialized in the center of the atrium. It showed Kael from multiple angles, the camera's view, but also aerial perspectives, thermal imaging, even a schematic overlay that attempted to analyze his energy signature and failed, displaying only error messages. And in the corner of that feed, a smaller window appeared. It showed a man in a pristine white uniform, sitting in a sterile control room. His face was obscured by a smooth, featureless mask that reflected the glow of countless monitors. The Overseer. He leaned forward, his masked face filling the smaller window. Kael could hear the whisper, though it came from no speaker in the mall. The voice seemed to originate in his own mind, cold and synthetic. Target acquired for deletion. The feed cut out. The hologram vanished. The security camera exploded in a shower of sparks. But the message was clear. They were watching. And they were coming. The air crackled with unnatural energy as 3 sleek, obsidian drones descended from the ash-gray sky. They moved with mechanical precision, their surfaces shimmering with hexagonal patterns of blue light that pulsed in time with the thrum of the game's underlying code. Kael recognized them immediately, administrator units, far more dangerous than the security drones he'd encountered before. He stood in the ruins of what had once been a corporate plaza, the skeletal remains of glass towers rising around him like broken teeth. His passive aura of annihilation hummed at 87% integrity, the strain from Celine's trap field still lingering in his metaphysical senses. The drones didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, they emitted low-frequency pulses that warped the very fabric of the game space around him. Reality-anchoring bolts. The term came to him from some buried memory of system protocols he'd glimpsed during his millennium in Hell. These weren't designed to kill, they were designed to lock anomalies in place for deletion. The first bolt struck the ground 10 meters to his left. Space itself seemed to crystallize, the air turning into a honey-thick substance that resisted movement. Kael felt his aura flicker as the bolt's energy interacted with his passive defense. A system notification flashed in his Hellforge interface, visible only to him. Warning, reality stabilization field detected. Aura integrity, 85% and decreasing. Soul essence reserves, 25 units. He moved, his body a blur of motion honed across centuries of combat. But the drones anticipated him. The second bolt landed ahead, creating another zone of thickened reality. The third struck behind. They were boxing him in, triangulating his position with cold, algorithmic efficiency. Kael's boots crunched on broken concrete as he pivoted, his senses expanding through the Hellforge system. He could feel the soul essence of fallen players lingering in the environment, faint whispers of power left behind by those who had died in this plaza during previous safe zone contractions. But harvesting them would require concentration he couldn't spare. His aura dropped to 83% as another pulse washed over him. The drones were maintaining a constant suppression field now, the 3 points of their formation creating a triangle of stabilized reality that slowly drained his defenses. He could feel the game's rules pressing against him, trying to force him into compliance with its intended parameters. A memory surfaced, not from Earth, but from the Hellscapes. A demon lord who had tried to trap him in a cage of solidified suffering. Kael had burned his way out with hellfire so black it consumed light itself. He scanned his surroundings. To the east, the skeletal towers. To the west, the collapsed remains of an underground transit station. To the north, there. A building that seemed less damaged than the others. Its windows were intact, covered with what looked like homemade shielding made from scavenged materials. And more tellingly, he could sense faint energy signatures from within. Not soul essence, but something else. Technological. Alive. Kael made his decision. He couldn't fight the drones head-on without burning through his soul essence reserves, and he needed those for what was to come. The Overseer had marked him, and Eclipse would be mobilizing their full force. Every unit of essence mattered. He activated Void Step. The world blurred around him as he phased through the thickened reality fields. It cost him nothing in soul essence, the skill was part of his core abilities, forged in Hell and integrated into his being. But maintaining it under the drone suppression field strained his aura further. Integrity, 80%. He moved in bursts of impossible motion, appearing and disappearing across the plaza as the drones recalibrated their targeting. One of them fired a tracking bolt that followed him through his phases, forcing him to expend precious milliseconds dodging. He reached the shielded building just as his aura integrity dropped to 78%. The entrance was a reinforced steel door covered in graffiti that looked like coded symbols rather than random vandalism. Kael didn't bother with the lock. He placed his palm against the metal, and true damage imbuement flowed through his touch. The door didn't just break, it disintegrated at the molecular level, turning to dust that drifted to the ground in a silent cascade. Inside was darkness, then light as motion-activated glow strips flickered to life along the walls. The space was a hacker's den, that much was immediately clear. Banks of monitors lined one wall, displaying scrolling code and system logs. Wires snaked across the floor like technological vines. In the center of the room, a young woman with short-cropped blue hair and cybernetic implants along her temples looked up from a console, her eyes widening. "You're him," she said, her voice flat with disbelief. The anomaly. Before Kael could respond, the drones outside fired simultaneously. 3 reality-anchoring bolts struck the building's exterior. The walls shimmered as whatever shielding the woman had installed resisted the stabilization field, but only barely. Cracks appeared in the concrete, spreading like spiderwebs. "They'll collapse the building on us in 30 seconds, the woman said, her fingers already flying across a holographic keyboard. "Your aura won't hold against structural failure at this integrity level." Kael studied her. Lyra, according to the Hellforge System's passive identification scan. Rogue player. Hacker class. No immediate hostile intent detected. "You know about my aura. I've been monitoring you since you triggered that first system error," Lyra said without looking up. Her eyes tracked lines of code scrolling across 3 different monitors. "The Overseer thinks you're just a bug. I know you're something else. Something from outside the system entirely." Another bolt struck. The ceiling groaned. Dust sifted down between cracks. 20 seconds, Lyra said. "I can hack their targeting for 15. It'll create a window. Can you destroy them in that time?" Kael glanced at his soul essence reserves. 25 units. Hellfire eruption would cost him at least 10, maybe more against administrator-grade drones. But letting them continue would drain his aura to critical levels. "Do it." Lyra's fingers danced across the interface. She wasn't using the game's sanctioned hacking skills, Kael could see that much. Her methods were crude, brutal, exploiting vulnerabilities in the code itself. A true rogue, operating outside even the game's intended mechanics for her class. The drones outside stuttered. Their hexagonal light patterns flickered, going from steady blue to erratic crimson. For 15 seconds, they would be confused, their targeting algorithms scrambled. Kael stepped back through the ruined doorway. The 3 drones hovered in a loose formation, their weapons cycling through target acquisition protocols that no longer functioned properly. He raised a hand, palm upward. Hellfire eruption didn't require incantations or gestures. It was part of him, as natural as breathing. But he focused his will, channeling 12 units of soul essence into the skill. The cost was higher than expected, the drone's reality stabilization fields created resistance even when hacked. Black flames erupted from his palm. They weren't flames in the conventional sense. They were voids in reality, tears in the game's fabric that consumed everything they touched. The air around them distorted, light bending toward the darkness as if being sucked into a singularity. Kael directed the eruption outward in a controlled cone. The first drone tried to evade, but Lyra's hacking held. It moved in jerky, unpredictable patterns. The hellfire touched its obsidian surface, and the drone didn't melt or explode, it simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a marvel of corporate technology. The next, it was an absence in the air, its very code unraveled from reality. The second drone fired a desperate bolt, but the hellfire consumed the energy before it could travel halfway to Kael. The black flames wrapped around the drone, and it too vanished into nothingness. The third drone attempted to flee, ascending rapidly. Kael focused, and the hellfire stretched upward like a serpent of pure annihilation. It caught the drone just as Lyra's hacking window expired. The drone's systems reactivated at the last second, but too late. It disintegrated into digital ash that scattered on the wind. Silence fell over the plaza. Kael's soul essence reserves dropped to 13 units. His aura integrity stabilized at 78%, no longer under active suppression. He turned back to the hacker's den. Lyra was watching him through the ruined doorway, her expression unreadable. "They'll send more," she said. "The Overseer doesn't give up." And now Eclipse knows your exact location. Kael re-entered the building. The interior was cluttered but organized in its own chaotic way. He noted the absence of personal items, no photographs, no mementos. This wasn't a home. It was a forward operating base. You hacked their drones. Why? Because I want the same thing you do, Lyra said, turning back to her consoles. She brought up a holographic display that showed the global game map. I want this system destroyed. Her fingers moved, and the display zoomed in on a location marked with corporate sigils Kael recognized from his brief time back on Earth before the apocalypse. Ethelgard Incorporated. The name meant nothing to him then. Now, seeing it emblazoned across what appeared to be a central server complex, it took on ominous significance. The death game isn't just entertainment, Lyra continued. Her voice took on a hard edge. It's a harvesting operation. Every player who dies, every monster slain, every ounce of energy expended in combat, it all gets funneled here. She tapped the central server location. Ethelgard built this system to power something. An AI god, according to the fragments of code I've managed to decrypt. Kael studied the map. The server complex was located in what had once been a mountain research facility, now fortified beyond anything else in the game world. Multiple layers of security, both digital and physical. Guardian monsters with stats that dwarfed even Eclipse's top members. And at its heart, the core where the harvested energy coalesced. You're planning to breach it, Lyra said, not a question. It's controlling this world, Kael replied. His voice was low, matter of fact. It needs to be broken. Lyra nodded as if she'd expected this answer. Then we have a problem. The moment you penetrate the outer defenses, the AI god will become aware of you. It won't just send hunters or administrators. It'll rewrite local reality to stop you. Create zones where the game's rules no longer apply, or apply in ways specifically designed to counter your abilities. She brought up another display. This one showed troop movements across the game map. Hundreds of markers, all converging on their current location. Eclipse's sigil, a crescent moon swallowing a sun, marked each one. But we have a more immediate problem, Lyra said. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up live surveillance feeds from drones she'd apparently hijacked earlier. The feeds showed squads of players in deep purple armor moving through the urban ruins with military precision. Not the small teams Kael had faced before. This was a full guild mobilization. Eclipse's main force, Lyra confirmed. They're not hunting you anymore. They're going to war. The guild master himself is leading the vanguard. On the central monitor, a figure appeared. Tall, clad in armor that seemed to drink the light around it, carrying a weapon that wasn't a sword or staff but something that shifted between forms, part blade, part cannon, part something else entirely. The Guildmaster of Eclipse. His stats, visible even through the surveillance feed thanks to Lyra's hacking, were maxed across every category the game tracked. And he was looking directly at one of Lyra's hidden cameras, as if he knew they were watching. He's coming for you, Lyra said, her voice tight. And he's bringing the entire guild. 200 elite players, all with stats in the top percentile. Trap specialists, reality benders, chronomancers, everything the game has to offer, optimized for one purpose. She turned to Kael, her cybernetic implants glowing faintly. They'll be here in less than an hour. We need to move. I know a route to the server complex that might avoid their scouts. But once we start moving toward it. She didn't need to finish. Kael understood. Once they committed to the path toward the central server, there would be no turning back. The Overseer would throw everything at them. Eclipse would pursue relentlessly. And at the end of the road, an AI god that fed on human suffering. Kael looked at the map of the server complex, then at the feeds showing Eclipse's advancing forces. His aura hummed at 78%. His soul essence reserve stood at 13 units. He had no allies except a rogue hacker he'd met minutes ago. And yet, as he stood there